Welcome to this week's Force.comcast episode, where we're going to talk about testing our ApexREST service that we've written previously. So in the past few videos, we've written a couple of ApexREST web services that we've used to create languages, and we've also seen nested resources with language frameworks. So we're just going to spend a few minutes here doing the final piece, which is testing them. So we can see here in front of us we have the language service we've created previously, and the important thing to note about testing these classes is that it's just regular Apex you've got to test. There's only a couple of minor things you have to think about and everything's ready. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a look through the test methods for both the get languages, so this HTTP get method here, and the create language method. And that should tell us everything we need to know to do the post and the put and the delete. So I've got here a class called language service test. It's just a regular test class, and at the top I've just created a utility method that I'd use multiple times if I had the other tests for creating a test language. So to test the get method, what we need to do is we'll create a language, and then it's important for us to note that in this method we're using the request URI to get the last index of the slash character so that we can retrieve the ID. So as part of this test, because we're using that request URI, we're going to need to set the request URI in the context we're working with to be able to retrieve that same value. So there's a method here. So we've created the REST request, which is just standard Apex class, and then what we've done is we've called REST context.request, and then we've set that to be equal to our request value. The same can work with REST context.response, and if we see here, we're calling REST context.request as our first line to retrieve this REST request. When we run this method, therefore, what it does is the system will then set the existing REST context to have this as the request with this particular URI, so that then we can retrieve the values. On this REST request, you can also set headers and body parameters and things like that, so that if you're building out a more structured request, you can test that just as you would like to as well. And simply all we do is we call the language service method, which is just a standard Apex call, and we assert on the values we retrieve. So as you can see, there's really nothing overly complicated there once we've remembered to set this request, and that's as difficult as it gets. For doing the testing of the create method, we can see that we've got these parameters. And when we were doing this using the REST calls, we were just passing these in as part of the request, and they were going in there. But obviously, because we're in Apex and we're testing from within the system, we can just simply call this method and pass in the parameters as we would do for any normal Apex class. So again, we just call the language service, call the create language method, passing in our parameters, and then we're just going to assert that the ID that we get back is not null. And we can run these tests. And they should both pass for us, and we've tested our ApexREST service. So writing tests for these is no different to writing tests for any other Apex methods. You've just got to be aware of certain things. So there we go. We've passed, and if we have a look at the code coverage, we've got obviously one of the instances we need to check, so when we've not got an ID, and then all these others we need to write for as well. So it's no different to writing tests for really any other Apex method. There's just a couple of little gotchas around the REST request. Similarly, if you're making a call and you expect something in the response, or you've got a custom response, you can here retrieve for assertions. You could do REST response. And that would retrieve the response with any parameters that have been set by the language service. So if we were going in here and as part of this adding a different status or a different set of parameters to come back in the response here, we could set that. We could set those in the method as normal, and then we could retrieve them here and then assert upon them. That's the end of this week's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much for watching. Please follow @Force.comcast to keep up to date with the latest videos and posts around them.